Hello everyone. Welcome back to our fourth series on world history. For the next 20 lectures, we are going to learn about the Middle Ages. In European history, the Middle Ages really begin with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. So, to understand the origin of the Middle Ages, we need to go back to the decline of the Roman Empire. Today, we will be focusing on the years between 180 and 376 AD. During these 2 centuries, the Roman Empire was still the strongest power in Europe, but it had begun a long, slow decline, which would result in the collapse of the Western Empire in the 5th century. Today, we will study that decline. The peak of Roman power occurred during the 84 years that Rome was ruled by the 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. During their rule, Europe experienced its longest period of internal peace. Historians call this time the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. The empire reached its greatest extent in 117 AD, when its territory even reached Mesopotamia. Here is a map of the empire at that time. Unfortunately, this golden age ended in 180 AD, when the emperor Marcus Aurelius made a mistake. Instead of picking the most competent man to be his successor, as his predecessors had done, he chose his son Commodus. This was a disaster, because Commodus was a terrible ruler. He was more interested in luxury and games than ruling the empire. He was also a megalomaniac and claimed to be a living god. In 192 AD, he was assassinated. This assassination began a terrible period in Roman history which lasted for 104 years. In the century before 192, the empire had 6 emperors. In the century afterwards, it had 26. Historians call this time the crisis of the 3rd century, and this is when the decline of Rome began. Here I have posted the years that each of those 26 emperors were in power. As you can see, most of them did not rule for very long. The average reign was only about 4 years. And that's because emperors were constantly being betrayed, assassinated, or overthrown by the army. As you can see, of those 26 emperors, only 3 died a natural death. The rest were murdered by their political enemies. This constant political instability weakened the empire. And of course, many of these emperors died fighting civil wars with other men trying to replace them. During the 3rd century, the empire experienced near constant civil war as Roman fought Roman. And during this century, the Parthian dynasty in Persia was overthrown and a new, more aggressive family took over the Persian Empire, the House of Sassan. After 224 AD, they became Rome's most powerful enemy. The Persians were dangerous because they were equal to the Romans in wealth and sophistication, and the Sassanid dynasty was more energetic and aggressive than the Parthians had been. As these wars continued, fewer and fewer citizens wanted to serve in the army, so the Romans became more dependent on recruiting Germanic soldiers. After a while, fewer and fewer of the people who fought for Rome were actually Romans themselves. These emperors were also constantly short on money to pay their armies, so they tried debasing their currency in order to make their silver supplies go farther. Debasement means mixing a greater percentage of cheap metal like copper in with more valuable metals like silver or gold, and then pretending the coins are just as valuable as they were before. You can see this debasement in the declining quality of Roman coins from this period. But of course, people figured out what was happening and the coins dropped in value. This caused massive inflation, which badly damaged the economy. And then the Romans also had to deal with the worst epidemic in their history. During the reign of Marcus Aurelius, a disease killed millions of people, including the emperor's second-in-command, Lucius Verus. This may be why Marcus Aurelius was forced to choose his son Commodus as his successor. Scientists think that this same disease spread across Eurasia by following the Silk Road and reached China, or maybe it went the other way. However it got there, this disease also caused turmoil in China, which eventually led to the collapse of the Han dynasty. And then, 70 years later, another plague hit the empire. This one lasted from 249 to 262 AD. Historians call this one the Plague of Cyprian, after the Christian bishop who wrote about it. We think that these two epidemics, from 165 to 180 and from 249 to 262, might have marked the emergence of smallpox in human history. And since Eurasian populations had not yet developed immunity to the disease, it may have killed 25% of the population during both epidemics. Modern medicine has defeated smallpox and driven the virus extinct in 1980. But before that happened, this disease killed hundreds of millions of people across the centuries and changed the course of human history. The crisis of the 3rd century eventually ended with the Emperor Diocletian. He realized that the empire was too big for one man to rule. So he created a system with 2 senior emperors called Augusti, who ruled the eastern and western halves, and 2 junior emperors called Caesars, who helped him. This system was called the Tetrarchy, and it helped stabilize Rome. Diocletian also moved his capital out of the city of Rome north to the city of Milan, then called Mediolanum. This made it faster for the emperor to get information from the rest of the empire and to respond to threats. And then Diocletian retired in 305 AD and lived out the rest of his life in peace. After Diocletian, the next strong emperor was named Constantine. He came to power in 313 AD. Unfortunately, this transition of power from Diocletian to Constantine was not peaceful. Instead, a short civil war was fought between Diocletian's potential successors. According to legend, before a key battle in that civil war, Constantine looked up and saw the Greek letters Chi and Rho in the sun, and heard a voice say, "In my name you will conquer." Chi and Rho are the first 2 Greek letters in the word Christ, as in Jesus Christ. Constantine told his soldiers to paint those letters on their shields, and then they won the battle. This battle is called the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and it is a key turning point in Roman history. According to legend, Constantine then converted to Christianity and became Rome's first Christian emperor. But more skeptical historians have another explanation for his conversion. They point out that Constantine's mother was a Christian, and they argue that the Christian religion had grown enough by this point to be a strong power base for a man looking to become emperor. Whatever the real reason, Constantine's conversion changed the course of world history. After him, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire and then the dominant religion of Europe. Constantine had an impact on Roman history in a second way. He moved the capital city from Milan to a new city in the east. The original name of this city had been Byzantium, but he renamed it Constantinople after himself. Constantinople was built on a peninsula jutting out into the Bosphorus Strait. This was a wise strategic position for a capital city, which we will discuss in more detail in later lessons. But for now, here is a picture of what Constantinople looked like in Roman times. Constantine ruled the empire for 24 years, a very long reign for a Roman emperor. Then, in 337 AD, Constantine fell ill. He was baptized on his deathbed and died on May 22, 337 AD. After Constantine, the imperial crown passed to 3 of his sons, Constantine II, Constans, Constantius II, and then on to his nephew Julian. The reason the crown passed from Constantine's sons to his nephew is that his sons were vicious and treacherous and killed each other fighting over power. Constantine and his family may have been Christian, but when they fought each other over power, their behavior was very unlike Jesus Christ. And then, in 360, when the crown passed to Julian, he surprised everyone. Julian declared that he was not a Christian like his cousins and uncle. Instead, he was a pagan, like the classical Romans had been. He banned Christians from working as teachers and reopened the old pagan temples to gods like Jupiter and Minerva. Pagan Romans cheered. Christian Romans were furious. But Julian was emperor, so his decisions were law. Julian also grew a beard, which was different from his predecessors. He loved to read about and discuss philosophy, and he was willing to talk to people from all social classes. Julian is really a fascinating figure, and he might have changed Roman history. But in 362 AD, after just 2 years on the throne, he made the foolish decision to invade Persia. After spending the year in eastern Anatolia, Julian led his army into Persian territory on March 5th, 363 AD. For the next 3 months, they fought their way deeper and deeper into Persian territory. By late June, they were deep into Mesopotamia. But then came the Battle of Samarra on June 26th, 363 AD. This was a small, unimportant battle except for one reason. Julian was injured in the fighting. A spear struck him in the side and gave him a mortal wound. The wound became infected, and Julian died 3 days later on June 29th, 363 AD. With the death of their leader, the Roman army decided to retreat, and on the way back they elected a man named Jovian to be the new emperor. Jovian led the army out of Persia, but then died suddenly just 8 months later. After Jovian's sudden death, another general named Valentinian was chosen as emperor. Both Jovian and Valentinian were Christians, so the official religion went back to being Christianity during their rule. Valentinian would rule for the next 9 years, and in many ways he was the last of the great Roman emperors. But of course, Valentinian didn't know that at the time. What he did know was that the empire was too big to rule alone, and he needed to choose a co-emperor. But this was a dangerous choice. Whoever he chose might rebel against him and start another civil war. So, Valentinian chose the man who he trusted most in the world, his younger brother Valens. Valentinian also had a son named Gratian, but in 364 AD, Gratian was only 5 years old. In his official duties, Valentinian did a good job, but his private life was not as upstanding. In 370 AD, he fell in love with another woman named Justina, and divorced his first wife, Marina Severa. Then Valentinian had 2 children with Justina, a daughter named Flavia Galla, born in 370, and a son named Valentinian II, born the next year in 371 AD. The descendants of this royal family would rule Rome for the next 75 years as the empire fell apart. But for now, everything seemed stable. And then, in 375 AD, Valentinian died suddenly at the age of 54. He suffered a stroke while angrily yelling at some ambassadors from a Germanic tribe. Authority now passed to his 16-year-old son Gratian and younger brother Valens. Valentinian's death happened at a terrible time for the empire, because at that point a new menace was just beginning to emerge, a powerful new people called the Huns. The Huns had been living on the steppe grasslands north of the Caspian Sea for centuries, but in the late 300s they began moving west. They crossed the Volga River around 360 and arrived north of the Black Sea by 375, the year Valentinian died. The Huns were usually disorganized and fought among themselves, but when united by a strong king, their skills fighting with arrows on horseback made them an almost unstoppable force. In this way, they were very similar to the Mongols who came 800 years later. Now they were moving west, pushing into land controlled by their neighbors, the Goths. They defeated the Goths in battle, and many Gothic tribes began moving south and west in order to flee the Hunnic advance. Of course, the only thing south and west was the Roman Empire, so the Goths and other Germanic tribes began pushing against the Roman border. So, like a row of dominoes, the Hunnic migrations began a chain of events that would eventually lead to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But the details of that story must wait for our next lesson as we discuss the Goths. I hope you will join me next time for the next part of this story. Thank you all very much.